It was a calm evening in a quiet neighborhood. The sun had just started to sink behind the rows of small houses, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. Birds were settling into the trees and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Most people were winding down after a long day, but for one elderly woman, the evening was far from ordinary. Lillian had lived in this neighborhood for more than 30 years. She was in her 70s with silver hair that framed her gentle face. Her eyes, though lined with age, sparkled with alertness and intelligence. Life had not always been easy for her, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. She walked slowly, leaning slightly on her cane, but there was a strength in the way she moved that people who knew her could never ignore. Beside her padded a large dog, moving with grace and alertness. Max was a retired police K-9, a German shepherd who had served his years in law enforcement with distinction. Now in retirement, he lived a peaceful life with Lillian. Despite no longer wearing a uniform or chasing criminals, Max had not lost his sharp instincts or his loyalty. He was always watchful, his ears twitching at the faintest sound, his nose constantly sensing the world around him. For Lillian, Max was more than a pet. He was a companion, a friend, and a protector. That evening, Lillian had gone to the local grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. She carried a small bag of groceries, trying to balance it as carefully as she could. The streets were mostly empty, which made the quiet comforting but also in some ways unnerving. She noticed shadows stretching across the pavement, but she was not afraid. Max walked calmly at her side, and that gave her confidence. She knew that with him nearby, she was never truly alone. However, not all who walked the streets that evening had good intentions. A group of 3 young men, each in their early 20s, wandered into the neighborhood. They had come from the other side of town, drawn by the quiet streets and the easy opportunity for trouble. They were reckless, loud, and careless, their steps echoing as they laughed and pushed each other along. Alcohol and poor decisions had clouded their judgment, making them bold enough to think they could intimidate anyone they chose. As they turned the corner, they spotted Lillian. Their eyes narrowed. She seemed frail, her steps slow, her hair white with age. To them, she appeared to be an easy target, someone who would not fight back. They whispered among themselves, sneering, confident in their plan. One of them suggested grabbing her bag while another mocked her, trying to get a rise out of her. They didn't know anything about her or the dog walking calmly beside her. Lillian, however, sensed something was wrong. She had seen enough in her life to recognize danger when it approached. Her eyes flicked toward the young men, noting their sloppy movements and the way they lingered too close. She tightened her grip on her cane, feeling its familiar weight in her hand. Max slowed his pace, positioning himself slightly ahead, his body tense and ready. His instincts told him that something was not right. The 3 men moved closer, grinning with misplaced confidence. "Hey, old lady," one said, slurring slightly. "Hand over the bag. Don't make this hard." They laughed, thinking their intimidation would work. Lillian remained calm. She did not flinch. She looked at them directly, her gaze steady, unafraid. "Please leave me alone," she said in a firm but measured voice. "I don't want any trouble." The young men laughed louder, assuming she was scared. "Oh, we'll have fun with this one," one of them said. They moved closer, unaware of the presence behind her. The retired police dog who was trained to handle far worse than 3 drunk men. Max's ears perked up, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring. He could sense the danger in their voices, the wrongness in their movements. He had faced criminals before, and though he was retired, the instinct to protect never left him. The tension hung thick in the air. Lillian, though old and unassuming in appearance, stood tall. Her hand rested on Max, giving him a gentle command. Max knew exactly what she wanted, and he stayed close, his eyes fixed on the men. The attackers were too busy with their bravado to notice the silent warning in the dog's stance. One of the men reached for her bag, thinking it would be an easy grab. That was the moment Max acted. With incredible speed, he lunged forward, positioning himself between Lillian and the attackers. His bark was sharp and commanding, a sound that immediately stopped the young men in their tracks. They had never heard anything like it. The dog moved with precision, not biting too hard but making it clear that he would not allow anyone to harm his owner. The attackers stumbled back, shocked by the sudden resistance. They had expected an elderly woman who would surrender without a fight. Instead, they were confronted by Max, who moved with the discipline and confidence of a dog trained for dangerous situations. Lillian's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding as she gave Max his next instruction. The dog responded instantly, circling them, making it impossible for them to reach her without facing his defensive movements. Neighbors began to notice the commotion. A few people peeked through their windows, unsure of what was happening but concerned enough to watch. The attackers tried to push past Max, but he was relentless. His training made him precise, controlled, and efficient. Every step he took was calculated to protect Lillian without causing unnecessary harm. The young men realized too late that they had underestimated both the woman and the dog beside her. Police were called, alerted by neighbors who saw the struggle and wanted to ensure no one got seriously hurt. Within minutes, the officers arrived, carefully assessing the situation. Max did not move until he received a signal from Lillian, and by then the three men were already intimidated, unsure how to react to a retired K-9 who clearly still had the skills of his active duty days. Lillian stood quietly, holding her bag and her cane as Max positioned himself protectively beside her. She spoke softly to the dog, praising him in a way that showed their bond was deeper than words. Max's tail wagged slightly, a sign that he was proud but still focused on the job at hand. The men, on the other hand, were overwhelmed and frightened. Their arrogance had led them to a situation they could not control, and now the police were stepping in to handle the rest. The incident would later become a story people in the neighborhood told for months. Lillian, though shaken, remained humble about the event. She emphasized that it was Max who had prevented a serious incident, not her own courage alone. But those who witnessed the event knew the truth. The courage of an elderly woman standing her ground, combined with the skill and loyalty of a retired police dog, was what had saved the day. As the sun set completely and the streetlights flickered on, the neighborhood returned to its quiet state. Lillian walked slowly home, Max at her side, ever vigilant. The three men were taken away by the police, learning a lesson they would not forget anytime soon. And though the night had brought fear and uncertainty, it also showed something remarkable, that age, experience, and loyalty could be more powerful than recklessness and arrogance. Lillian reached her doorstep, tired but composed. Max sat beside her, watching the street with careful eyes. For the elderly woman and her faithful companion, life would continue quietly, but now with the reminder that even in the calmest of places, courage and vigilance could make all the difference. That evening, as Lillian prepared her small dinner, she reflected on the events. She knew she had faced danger, but she also knew that Max had been there every step of the way. A guardian who had once served the public and now served her personally. In the soft glow of her kitchen, she felt gratitude for her loyal companion, for her safety, and for the lessons that life, even at 70+ years, still had to teach. The night air felt cooler now as Lillian and Max remained on her porch, their eyes quietly scanning the street. Though the police had taken the three young men away, the adrenaline from the confrontation was still fresh. Lillian could feel her heart beating faster than usual, not from fear but from the sudden surge of tension and relief. Max sat beside her, alert but calm, his chest rising and falling steadily. Even after retirement, he had the composure of a seasoned police K-9, a protector who knew when to act and when to wait. Lillian thought back to the moment when the first man had reached for her bag. Her mind replayed every detail, the way Max had leaped forward, the commanding bark, and the way the attackers had staggered back, shocked and unprepared. She had trained with Max for years after his retirement, and she realized just how valuable those months of practice and bonding had been. Max responded instantly to her commands, no hesitation, no mistake. He had always been loyal, but tonight he had proven once again that his loyalty extended beyond his official duty. It was personal, directed toward her. She reached down and patted his head gently. "Good boy, Max. You did exactly what I knew you would." Max wagged his tail slightly but kept his gaze on the street, alert to any sign of trouble. Lillian allowed herself a quiet smile. She felt proud, not because of the confrontation itself, but because she had trusted Max and he had come through for her. She knew that in moments of danger, trust and preparation could be more powerful than strength alone. Inside her house, the lights were warm and welcoming. The familiar smells of lavender from her living room and the faint scent of food from the kitchen offered comfort after the chaos outside. She set her groceries down and began unpacking them, but her mind kept returning to the incident. What could have happened if Max hadn't been there? The thought made her shiver. She realized that sometimes danger came unexpectedly, and life's fragility could appear in a single instant. Yet she also knew that courage and preparation could make a difference in ways most people underestimated. Meanwhile, the three young men were in the back of a police car, still dazed from the encounter. They had thought they could intimidate an elderly woman, but they had never anticipated the presence of a retired K-9 with years of police training. Their arrogance had led them into a situation they could not control, and now as the officers questioned them, their bravado was gone. The police listened carefully, noting the disbelief in their eyes as they recounted the story. It was unusual enough that the officers found themselves sharing incredulous looks. They had seen tough criminals before, but few had been stopped by an elderly woman's dog. Back in the neighborhood, whispers began spreading among the neighbors. Some had watched from their windows, while others had heard the commotion from further down the street. Stories began forming. The elderly woman who had been attacked, the dog who had saved her, and the young men who had underestimated both. By the time Lillian had settled into her living room, the neighborhood was buzzing quietly with curiosity and admiration. People were beginning to realize that bravery and vigilance could come in the most unexpected forms. As Lillian prepared a simple dinner, she reflected on the role Max had played in the police force and how that experience shaped him. He had chased down criminals, protected officers, and faced danger head-on. Yet here he was in his retirement years, still capable of guarding her with the same precision. She thought about how important it was to respect animals like Max, not just as pets but as partners who could act decisively when needed. His intelligence, discipline, and loyalty were the result of years of service and careful training, qualities that had made him indispensable during the encounter tonight. The next morning, Lillian woke to the soft chirping of birds outside her window. The neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm. Children heading to school, cars moving slowly along the streets, neighbors greeting each other. Yet for her, the night's events lingered in her mind. She knew that even in peaceful communities, danger could appear suddenly. Her experience reminded her that vigilance was a form of self-respect, and preparation was a gift one gave to oneself. She patted Max, who stretched lazily on the rug by the window, his eyes still scanning the street. Though the world outside seemed calm, he remained a sentinel, always ready, always alert. Word of the incident spread quickly beyond the neighborhood. Social media posts described the elderly woman and her dog, praising their courage and highlighting the unusual circumstances. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon Lillian found herself receiving calls and messages from journalists and concerned citizens alike. She was careful to respond politely, but she refused to sensationalize the event. Her message was simple: respect, preparation, and loyalty could save lives, and sometimes the most unexpected heroes were the ones who had quietly served their communities for years. Neighbors began visiting her house, offering small gestures of kindness, flowers, baked goods, and words of admiration. They wanted to check on her well-being and also to meet Max, whose presence had clearly saved the day. Lillian greeted them warmly, but she remained humble. She told them, "It wasn't just me. Max has been trained for years and I have learned to trust him." That is what made the difference. Her words resonated with everyone who heard them. People admired her courage but also recognized the importance of the bond she shared with Max. A bond built on trust, care, and years of companionship. Meanwhile, the three young men faced legal consequences for their actions. The authorities treated the case seriously, not only because of the attempted assault but also because of the reckless endangerment involved. Their initial arrogance was replaced with fear and regret. They were confronted with the reality that their choices had consequences and that sometimes underestimating someone or something could lead to unexpected and powerful resistance. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal for Lillian, but she noticed subtle changes around her. The neighbors treated her with greater respect. Children waved at her as she walked past, and people on the street spoke to Max as if acknowledging the silent hero of the story. Lillian appreciated the attention but remained grounded. She understood that the true lesson was not in praise or recognition, but in the quiet courage she had shown and the loyalty Max had demonstrated. Lillian also began reflecting more deeply on the nature of bravery. She realized it was not about physical strength or fearlessness, but about standing firm in the face of danger, making calm decisions, and trusting the bonds one had built over time. Her years of companionship with Max had taught her patience, observation, and discipline. These qualities, combined with his training, had made it possible for them to confront a dangerous situation successfully. One afternoon, Lillian decided to take Max for a walk around the neighborhood. The streets seemed peaceful, almost oblivious to the events of the previous night. Yet she moved with a quiet vigilance, aware of her surroundings, and teaching younger neighbors by example about how to be mindful and prepared. Children followed her at a distance, fascinated by Max and the story they had heard from their parents. Lillian spoke gently, explaining that respect and trust were important whether in humans or animals. Max has always walked beside her, calm but alert, embodying the lesson perfectly. During this period, Lillian received a letter from the police department, acknowledging Max's exceptional role in protecting her and the community. They praised not only his skills but also the way she had handled the situation, staying calm under pressure and maintaining control. Lillian accepted the letter with quiet gratitude, understanding that recognition was secondary to the knowledge that she and Max had stayed safe and had prevented harm. The incident also sparked discussions in the neighborhood about safety, respect, and preparation. Adults and children alike talked about how important it was to stay aware and how courage could appear in the most unexpected forms. Lillian's story, though centered on a single night, became a lesson for many, one that emphasized that even in seemingly ordinary lives, extraordinary actions could occur. By the end of Part 2, Lillian had settled into a routine once more, but the bond between her and Max felt stronger than ever. She knew that life could present challenges at any time, and she felt prepared, not because of fear, but because of experience, trust, and the unwavering loyalty of a companion who had dedicated his life to protecting others. Max, the retired police dog, had once again proven that heroes come in many forms, and that courage is often found in quiet vigilance, trust, and the bonds we hold dear. Word about Lillian and Max had spread beyond the quiet neighborhood almost as quickly as the evening itself. By the next morning, her phone was buzzing with messages from people she had never met. Neighbors, distant acquaintances, even strangers who had heard the story online. Most of them were expressing admiration. Some were curious about how she had stayed calm in such a dangerous situation, and others wanted to know more about Max. Lillian felt a mixture of humility and disbelief. She had never sought attention, yet here she was, receiving messages and calls about something she had simply done to protect herself. As she read through the messages, Max lay at her feet, eyes alert but relaxed. Even though he was no longer an active-duty police dog, his presence reminded her that danger could appear at any moment, and that vigilance was always necessary. Lillian smiled gently down at him and stroked his fur. "You've been more than just a dog, Max," she whispered. "You've been my guardian, my friend, and my hero." Max wagged his tail slightly, almost as if he understood every word. Later that day, a local journalist knocked at her door. He introduced himself politely and explained that he wanted to feature her story in the community news section. Lillian hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted so much attention, but she realized that telling her story could help others understand the importance of preparation, courage, and the special bond between humans and animals. She agreed, inviting him inside and letting Max settle comfortably in the corner, his ears flicking occasionally at sounds from the street. During the interview, Lillian spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words. "It wasn't bravery in the usual sense," she explained. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just aware, and I trusted Max. He has served for many years protecting people and handling dangerous situations. I've learned to understand him, to read his signals, and to act calmly. That's what kept us safe." The journalist listened intently, scribbling notes. He could sense the sincerity in her words, the lived experience behind them, and the quiet courage that didn't need applause or recognition. News of the story quickly spread. Social media users shared the article, highlighting Max as the unsung hero and Lillian as a figure of calm bravery. Comments poured in from people all over, praising her courage and marveling at the intelligence and loyalty of Max. Lillian received notes from parents who wanted their children to learn about responsibility and trust through her story, and from dog owners who admired the training and bond she had with Max. Each message warmed her heart, but it also reminded her of the larger lesson, that even ordinary people could face extraordinary situations, and how preparation, awareness, and calm thinking could make all the difference. The neighborhood itself had changed in subtle ways. People stopped to greet her when she walked with Max. Children watched in awe as the dog moved beside her, respecting the quiet authority in his movements. Conversations among neighbors included references to the event, how courage sometimes comes in small packages, how loyalty and love could manifest in unexpected ways, and how someone like Lillian, who appeared fragile, could face danger and handle it so effectively. At the same time, Lillian found herself reflecting more deeply on the role of Max in her life. He had been a police dog for years, trained to act under extreme pressure, but he had never acted out of aggression. His instincts were guided by discipline, loyalty, and understanding. Even now in retirement, he maintained that same careful attention to his surroundings. Lillian realized that this experience had taught her more about courage than any book or lecture ever could. Courage, she thought, was not about fighting recklessly. It was about understanding the situation, staying calm, and acting with intention. In the days that followed, several neighbors approached her with small gestures of appreciation. One brought fresh-baked bread, another a bouquet of flowers, and yet another offered to help with groceries or errands. Lillian accepted their kindness graciously, but emphasized that she and Max were fine. She wanted them to know that the story was not about fear or danger, but about the value of trust, preparation, and companionship. Max, for his part, continued his routine with quiet dignity. He was aware of the attention but remained focused on his primary role, keeping Lillian safe. When they walked outside, his eyes scanned the surroundings, his ears moving at every sound and his body moved with the precision of a dog who had spent years serving in dangerous situations. Children and neighbors often remarked on his calmness, on the way he seemed to understand the world around him. Lillian would smile and explain, "He's trained to notice what others might miss. That training is something that stays with him, even in retirement." The three young men who had attacked Lillian were now facing the consequences of their actions. The police had filed charges citing reckless endangerment and attempted assault. Lillian was called to testify, not just about the events, but about how the situation had been diffused by her calm response and Max's intervention. She had prepared for this, knowing that her testimony could help ensure justice while also demonstrating the importance of accountability. She felt no anger toward them, only a quiet resolve that their actions could not be repeated in her neighborhood or anywhere else. As the days turned into a week, local schools reached out to Lillian, asking if she would be willing to speak to students about her experience. She agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to teach lessons about respect, responsibility, and awareness. When she visited the classrooms, Max accompanied her, sitting patiently beside her as the children listened. She explained how trust between a human and an animal could lead to incredible results, how staying calm in difficult situations could prevent panic, and how understanding one's surroundings was a form of strength. The students were fascinated not just by the story, but by the quiet courage Lillian displayed and the disciplined intelligence of Max. The story also reached local authorities who had known Max during his active duty years. They contacted Lillian, commending both her and Max for their handling of the situation. They praised her composure and Max's precise responses, noting that incidents like this were rare but important lessons in vigilance and preparedness. Lillian listened to their praise with humility, knowing that the real lesson was not in recognition, but in the ability to face danger effectively without unnecessary fear. Neighbors began adopting small safety measures inspired by Lillian's experience. Some installed better lighting, others walked their dogs more attentively, and some started simple safety routines in their own homes. Lillian didn't ask for these changes, nor did she demand attention. She simply observed the small ripple of awareness spreading through the community. It was a subtle reminder that courage and preparation didn't have to be dramatic or loud. They could quietly influence and inspire others in meaningful ways. Max, meanwhile, continued to demonstrate the balance between discipline and affection. He was gentle with children, patient with neighbors, and always alert when Lillian moved outside. Watching him, people could see the years of training and service etched into every movement. But they could also see the love and loyalty he had for Lillian, a bond forged through years of shared experiences and mutual trust. It was clear that their partnership went beyond the ordinary relationship between a pet and its owner. Lillian herself spent quiet evenings reflecting on the events. She thought about how life had prepared her for unexpected challenges, how patience and observation were sometimes more valuable than strength, and how trust, both in people and animals, could make all the difference. She felt gratitude for the small lessons of daily life that had culminated in a moment of calm bravery, and she understood that courage was not about fearlessness but about making thoughtful, deliberate choices when faced with danger. By the end of this part of her story, Lillian and Max had become local symbols of courage, loyalty, and quiet strength. People continued to talk about the events of that night, but the focus shifted from the fear to the lessons learned, the importance of preparation, the value of calm thinking, and the extraordinary capabilities of those who had been trained to protect and serve. Lillian's experience was no longer just her own. It had become a source of inspiration and education for her entire community. As the sun set each evening, Lillian and Max would sit by the window watching the quiet streets. Life had returned to its calm rhythm, but the lessons remained alive. They were reminders that even in ordinary circumstances, extraordinary courage could emerge, guided by trust, experience, and loyalty. Max rested his head on Lillian's lap, and she whispered to him, "Thank you for being here, for being steady, for being my hero." He wagged his tail softly, his eyes reflecting the quiet understanding that had always defined their relationship. Together, they had faced danger, and together, they had shown that courage and loyalty could overcome recklessness and fear. After the news of the incident had spread, the quiet neighborhood began to feel different. Lillian noticed it in small ways. Neighbors waved more often when she walked past. Children ran up to pet Max while politely asking her questions, and familiar faces offered smiles and kind words when she stepped outside. Life seemed almost normal, but there was an undercurrent of awareness, a subtle shift in how people treated one another and how they noticed the world around them. The event had reminded everyone that courage and vigilance could appear in the most unexpected forms. Lillian herself had settled back into her usual routine, but now she carried an added sense of confidence. Her walks with Max, once ordinary, felt purposeful, as if every step was part of a shared lesson. Max, ever alert and disciplined, walked at her side with quiet authority. People who had seen the incident often stopped to watch them pass, marveling at the calm dignity of both woman and dog. Lillian knew that Max's presence alone was reassuring to the community, but she never let it make her feel invincible. Vigilance, she reminded herself, was a lifelong habit, not a momentary reaction. A week after the incident, a local school reached out to Lillian. They had heard the story from parents in the community, and they wanted her to speak to the students about courage, preparation, and respect. Lillian agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to share lessons she had learned in a real, practical way. When she arrived at the school, Max sat calmly by her side, his presence immediately drawing the children's attention. The students were fascinated not just by the story, but by the quiet authority of the dog, who seemed to understand exactly how to behave in such a setting. Standing in front of the group, Lillian began to speak. "Courage is not about fighting recklessly or being fearless," she told the children. "It's about understanding the situation, staying calm, and trusting the bonds you have, whether with people or animals. Max has been trained for many years to respond carefully and precisely to danger. I've learned to trust him, and that trust is what kept us safe." She paused, letting the words sink in while Max stayed perfectly still, his eyes scanning the room as if confirming the importance of her lesson. After the talk, children eagerly asked questions. "Was Max scary when he attacked the men?" one boy asked. Lillian smiled gently. "Not at all. Max acted with discipline. He only did what was necessary to protect me. He didn't attack out of anger. He protected with purpose." A girl asked if she could pet him, and Lillian nodded, allowing the children to understand that respect was important. Even when interacting with a powerful and skilled animal, Max accepted their attention patiently, but his posture reminded everyone that he was still a protector at heart. News of Lillian's school visit spread, and soon other schools and community groups invited her to speak. She found herself sharing her story again and again, each time emphasizing the same key points. Courage is calm, preparation is essential, and trust can create extraordinary results. The more she spoke, the more she realized how much impact her story could have on others. People who had previously thought of courage in terms of heroic acts of physical strength began to understand that it could also be quiet, disciplined, and guided by intelligence and trust. At the same time, the three men who had attacked her were going through legal proceedings. Lillian had been called to testify, and she had prepared herself to remain calm and factual. She described the events clearly, explaining how she had sensed danger, how Max had acted, and how the situation had been controlled without unnecessary harm. The judge and jury listened closely, and her testimony emphasized that recklessness and arrogance had consequences. The case became a reminder that every action had an impact, and that the choices people made in moments of poor judgment could have lasting effects. Meanwhile, the community began to recognize the value of preparation and vigilance in everyday life. Neighbors installed better lighting, began walking in pairs, and checked on elderly residents more frequently. Children learned that courage could be quiet, and that respect for animals and people was essential. Lillian did not seek recognition for this change, but she quietly observed the positive influence her story had on those around her. It was a subtle but powerful ripple effect, showing that one event could inspire broader awareness and thoughtfulness. Lillian also reflected on how important the bond between her and Max had been in preventing danger. Their years together, the training, the mutual understanding, they had created a partnership built on trust and respect. Max had once served the public as a police dog, and now in his retirement he served Lillian personally. She realized that true courage was not just in physical acts, but in forming connections and learning to trust them, even in high-pressure situations. Max had taught her lessons about patience, observation, and calmness under pressure, lessons she now shared with the community. One afternoon, Lillian took Max for a longer walk, moving through the streets she had walked for decades. Children ran alongside them, asking questions, while neighbors waved and called out greetings. Lillian smiled and answered, always emphasizing the importance of awareness and preparation. Max stayed close to her side, occasionally sniffing the air but never straying from his role as protector. Observing him, people could see how training, loyalty, and intelligence could work together to create an extraordinary companion, one who not only acted in dangerous moments but also inspired respect and admiration in everyday life. The local police department reached out as well, acknowledging Max's role in protecting Lillian and preventing harm. They praised her calm, deliberate actions and Max's precise responses. Lillian accepted their words graciously, though she remained humble. She felt that the real lesson was not in recognition but in knowing that preparation, understanding, and calm action could prevent chaos and danger. Max's presence had reinforced that lesson in the most practical way possible. Community events began inviting Lillian and Max to demonstrate safety techniques and to teach lessons about vigilance, trust, and responsible behavior. These were not flashy demonstrations of power, but calm, deliberate exercises that highlighted observation, awareness, and mutual respect between humans and animals. Lillian enjoyed these events because they allowed her to share her experiences in a meaningful way, helping people understand that courage could be quiet, disciplined, and thoughtful. The three men, meanwhile, continued their legal proceedings. Their initial arrogance and lack of awareness were contrasted sharply against the calm control of Lillian and Max. In court, the focus was not on dramatizing the event, but on examining facts, intent, and consequences. Lillian's testimony had a profound impact, showing that recklessness could be stopped by careful preparation, and that even ordinary people could stand up to danger when they had the right support and mindset. By the end of the month, Lillian's life had returned to its rhythm, but the lessons she shared had touched the neighborhood in lasting ways. People walked more carefully, paid attention to their surroundings, and respected one another and the animals around them. Children spoke about courage, loyalty, and trust, and Max continued to serve as both protector and teacher, silently demonstrating the values that Lillian spoke about. Lillian often sat by her window in the evenings, watching the street below. The calm streets, the waving neighbors, the children playing safely, all of it reminded her that courage and preparation were never wasted. Max rested his head on her lap, alert yet relaxed, a steady presence that had made all the difference. She reflected on how life had taught her that true bravery was not loud or reckless, but measured, thoughtful, and guided by trust. As the sun set, Lillian whispered to Max, "We've done well, haven't we?" We've kept each other safe and we've helped others understand what courage really means." Max wagged his tail gently, his eyes reflecting quiet understanding. Together they had faced danger, and together they had turned an extraordinary moment into a lesson for an entire community. The story of that night was no longer just about a confrontation. It had become a story about resilience, trust, and the power of bonds formed through years of care and experience. Lillian and Max had not only protected themselves, they had inspired others to be aware, responsible, and courageous in their own lives. And as the neighborhood settled into another quiet evening, it was clear that their impact would be felt for a long time, quietly guiding those who lived nearby to notice, prepare, and act with both courage and care. The weeks following the incident passed quietly, but the memory of that night remained vivid for Lillian. Life in the neighborhood had returned to a peaceful rhythm, yet the events had left a lasting impression on everyone. People now spoke about bravery differently, not as a display of physical strength or loud heroics, but as the calm, steady courage that Lillian had shown, supported by the loyalty and skill of Max. The story had become more than just an isolated incident. It was now a lesson for the entire community, a reminder that courage could come in unexpected forms. Lillian's mornings began in their usual way. She brewed her tea and set it on the small kitchen table while Max stretched beside her. His coat was still thick and shiny, a testament to the care she had always given him. He moved with the ease of a dog who had seen the worst but remained steadfast, never letting fear dictate his actions. Lillian often looked at him and thought about how extraordinary it was to have a companion like Max. Not just for protection, but for the quiet reassurance that came from knowing he was always alert, always ready, and always loyal. The local community had grown closer since the event. Neighbors spoke more often, looking out for each other in subtle ways. Parents reminded their children to be aware of their surroundings, and people shared tips about safety and vigilance without fear-mongering. Lillian noticed these changes as she walked through the streets, Max trotting by her side. She felt proud, not because of the attention she had received, but because of the way people were beginning to act responsibly and with thoughtfulness toward one another. It was a quiet, meaningful victory. Occasionally, Lillian received messages from people she had never met, letters and emails from parents, teachers, and even animal trainers. They praised her calmness and Max's loyalty, asking how they could teach similar values in their homes and communities. Lillian responded thoughtfully, emphasizing patience, training, and the importance of trust between humans and animals. She shared her experiences without